Parents publicly called me a disappointment at my graduation speech while praising my sister. Then for years later, they begged me to save her from jail, and when I refused, they tried to convince my grandparents to cut me out of their will. My name is Nathan, and for 22 years, I lived in the shadow of my older sister, Charlotte. I was the afterthought, the consolation prize, the child my parents tolerated while they poured all their love, attention, and resources into their golden daughter. I accepted this reality for most of my life because I genuinely believed that maybe Charlotte deserved it, maybe she was just that much better than me. But the day of my college graduation changed everything, and what happened for years later exposed the true character of everyone in my family. This is the story of how I finally learned to value myself, even when the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally never did. Growing up as the second child in the Morrison family meant living with an impossible standard. Charlotte was 3 years older than me, and from the moment I was old enough to understand, I knew she was special. My parents never let me forget it. She walked early, talked early, read early, excelled at everything she touched. Piano recitals where she played flawlessly, debate competitions she dominated, academic awards that lined our hallway. Charlotte was the superstar, and I was the kid who existed in the background of her highlight reel. My mother would introduce us to people by saying, "This is Charlotte, our Harvard-bound daughter, and this is Nathan, no accomplishments, no qualities, just my name." As if that was all, I was a name attached to a body that took up space in their perfect family portrait. I tried, God knows I tried. I joined the soccer team, but my parents rarely came to games because Charlotte had theater rehearsals. I made honor roll consistently, but it was never quite as impressive as Charlotte's perfect GPA. I learned guitar and wrote my own songs, but my parents would talk through my playing at family gatherings, telling stories about Charlotte's latest achievement to anyone who would listen. The message was clear. Nothing I did would ever matter as much as anything Charlotte did. By the time I was in high school, I'd mostly stopped trying to impress them. I focused on my own interests, worked part-time jobs to save money, and started planning for a future where I wouldn't need their approval to feel worthwhile. My guidance counselor, Mr. Peterson, was the first adult who ever seemed to see me as my own person. He encouraged me to apply to state universities with strong engineering programs, helped me secure scholarships, and told me something I'd never heard before. "Nathan, you're going to do great things because you've learned to rely on yourself. That's a strength your sister will never have." I got into a good state university with a full academic scholarship. My parents' reaction was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, honey," my mother said, barely looking up from her phone where she was texting Charlotte about her upcoming graduation from Harvard. My father nodded absently and said, "State school is a solid choice." Very practical. Meanwhile, Charlotte had been accepted to Yale Law School, and my parents threw her a celebration party with 50 guests, catered food, and a banner that read, "Congratulations to our brilliant daughter." When I graduated high school, we went to dinner at a chain restaurant, and my father spent most of the meal on a conference call. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was used to it, that I didn't need their validation. But it hurt. It always hurt. College was the first time in my life I felt like I could breathe. Away from my parents and Charlotte, I discovered who I was without the constant comparison. I excelled in my engineering courses, joined a robotics club, made genuine friends who valued me for who I was, and even started dating a wonderful girl named Emily who thought I was interesting and talented and worthy of attention. For 4 years, I built a life that was mine. I called home dutifully once a week, listened to my parents talk about Charlotte's internships at prestigious law firms and her important networking events, and shared brief updates about my own life that they barely acknowledged. "That's nice, dear," became my mother's standard response to anything I said. I graduated magna cum laude with a degree in mechanical engineering, had already accepted a job offer at a respected aerospace company, and was invited to give a speech at graduation as one of the top students in my department. I was proud of myself, probably for the first time in my life. and I genuinely believed that maybe, just maybe, my parents would be proud too. I invited my entire family to my graduation, my parents, Charlotte, and my father's parents, Grandma Ruth and Grandpa George, who had always been kind to me in a distant, obligatory sort of way. Everyone confirmed they would attend. I spent weeks preparing my speech, wanting it to be perfect, wanting to show my parents that I had accomplished something meaningful. The morning of graduation, I was nervous but excited. Emily was there with her family, my friends were there, and I kept scanning the crowd for my parents. They arrived late, just as the ceremony was starting, and had to sit in the back. Charlotte wasn't with them? She had a crucial meeting with a potential employer, my mother whispered to me during the brief moment before I had to line up with the other graduates. She sends her congratulations. I swallowed my disappointment and told myself it was fine. This day was about me and what I'd achieved, not about who showed up to witness it. When they called my name to give my speech, I walked to the podium with my heart pounding. I looked out at the sea of faces and began speaking about perseverance, about finding your passion, about the importance of believing in yourself even when others don't. I talked about the challenges I'd overcome, the late nights studying, the projects that failed before they succeeded, the moments when I doubted myself but pushed through anyway. It was honest and heartfelt, and I could see people in the audience nodding, some even wiping their eyes. I felt good. I felt seen. And then came the moment that would define my relationship with my family forever. After the ceremony ended, there was a reception where families gathered to congratulate the graduates. I found my parents near the refreshment table, and my mother immediately pulled me aside with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That speech was very nice, Nathan," she said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Though I have to say, all that talk about overcoming challenges and believing in yourself when others don't, it felt a bit dramatic, don't you think? You've had a perfectly fine life. We've supported you." Before I could respond, my father joined us with his parents. "Nathan," he said loudly, clearly intending for others around us to hear, "your mother and I want you to know that we're proud you finished college. It's an accomplishment, even if it's not quite at the level we're used to with Charlotte." He chuckled, and I felt my face burning. Grandpa George nodded and added, "Charlotte set quite a high bar. Yale Law School is extraordinarily prestigious, but state school is perfectly respectable for someone with your ... abilities." My grandmother pursed her lips and said nothing, but her expression said everything. Then my mother delivered the killing blow, speaking loudly enough that several nearby families turned to listen. "We just hope you understand that not everyone can be exceptional like Charlotte. There's no shame in being ordinary. You've done fine for what you are, and we appreciate that you didn't cause us too much worrying over these for years. Charlotte has been under such tremendous pressure, and it's been exhausting for us as parents, at least with you. We never had to stress because our expectations were, well, realistic." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around us, people had gone quiet, clearly uncomfortable witnessing this moment. I saw Emily's face across the room, her expression horrified. I saw Mr. Peterson, who had traveled 2 hours to attend my graduation, looking at my parents with barely concealed disgust. And I saw my own reflection in a nearby window, a young man in a graduation gown who had just given a speech about believing in yourself, being publicly humiliated by the people who were supposed to love him most. Something inside me snapped, not into anger, but into clarity. Cold, absolute clarity. "Thank you for coming," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage trembling through my body. "I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule focused on Charlotte to be here. I won't waste any more of it. Please enjoy the refreshments on your way out." My mother's eyes widened, clearly not expecting me to dismiss them. "Nathan, don't be so sensitive. We're just being honest with you, which is more than most parents would do. We're trying to help you have realistic expectations for your life." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. A cruel stranger who had spent my entire life making me feel small so she could feel important as Charlotte's mother. I have a job offer at North Star Aerospace making $75,000 a year as a starting salary, I said calmly. I graduated magna cum laude from a respected engineering program. I have friends who value me, a girlfriend who loves me, and a future I built entirely on my own without any of your support, financial or emotional. My expectations for my life are just fine. What's not fine is spending another moment pretending that your opinion of me matters. I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there. Behind me, I heard my father saying something about me being ungrateful and disrespectful, my mother's voice rising in indignation, but I didn't turn around. Emily met me halfway across the room and hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, "for the speech and for what you just did." Mr. Peterson approached and shook my hand firmly. "That took courage, son. You're going to be just fine," and for the first time in my life, I believed it. I didn't speak to my parents for 6 months after graduation. They called a few times in the first weeks, leaving voicemails that were equal parts guilt-tripping and justification. My mother insisted they had been brutally honest for my own good and that I was overreacting to constructive criticism. My father said I was being childish and disrespectful to the people who raised me, Charlotte called once, awkwardly stumbling through a half-hearted attempt to play peacemaker before admitting she didn't really understand what the problem was. "They've always been hard on both of us," she said. "It's just their way of pushing us to succeed," but that was a lie and we both knew it. They had never been hard on Charlotte. They had worshipped her, excused her, celebrated her every breath. The tough love was reserved exclusively for me, the disappointing child who had committed the unforgivable sin of not being as special as his sister. I let the calls go to voicemail and eventually blocked their numbers. I started therapy, something I should have done years earlier, and began unpacking the lifetime of emotional neglect and favoritism I'd normalized. My therapist, Dr. Winters, helped me understand that I hadn't been oversensitive or ungrateful. I had been systematically devalued by people who should have loved me unconditionally. And my reaction at graduation was a healthy boundary, not a character flaw. I thrived in my new job. Turned out that when you spend your whole life being told you're not good enough, you develop an incredible work ethic to prove people wrong. I was promoted within 18 months, then again a year after that. I moved in with Emily, adopted a dog, started saving for a house, and built a life that had absolutely nothing to do with my family of origin. My grandparents reached out occasionally with brief, formal cards on holidays, usually including a check with a note about helping their grandson establish himself. The amounts were always modest. A few $100s, and the notes were always stiff and impersonal. But I deposited the checks and sent polite thank you cards because they were at least making an effort, however minimal. I never asked about Charlotte, and they never volunteered information. It was a carefully maintained distance that suited everyone. I was happy, or at least I was learning how to be happy. The wounds from my childhood were deep, but they were healing. I was building a chosen family with Emily and our friends, people who actually cared about who I was rather than who they wanted me to be. And then, for years after my graduation, everything exploded in a way I never could have imagined. It started with a phone call from an unknown number that I almost didn't answer. When I did, my mother's voice came through, frantic and desperate in a way I'd never heard before. "Nathan, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for days. We need your help. It's about Charlotte." My first instinct was to hang up, but something in her voice made me pause. "What about Charlotte?" I asked, my tone flat and uninterested. My mother took a shaky breath. "She's been arrested. There's been a terrible misunderstanding, and she's being charged with embezzlement from the law firm where she works. It's all a mistake, obviously, but the bail is set at $500,000 and we can't come up with that kind of money. We need you to help us." I almost laughed. For years of silence, after publicly humiliating me at my graduation, after a lifetime of treating me as less than, they were calling because they needed money. "Why would I do that?" I asked. My mother's voice became sharp, the desperation giving way to her usual imperious tone. Because she's your sister, Nathan. Because family helps family. Because this is what decent people do. Decent people, I repeated slowly, don't publicly call their children disappointing. Decent people don't spend 22 years making one child feel worthless. Decent people don't only call when they need something. So no, I won't be helping Charlotte with her bail, my mother gasped. Nathan, you can't be serious. This is your sister's life we're talking about. Her entire future is at stake. She could go to prison if we don't help her, and we simply don't have the kind of money they're asking for. You have a good job, you must have savings. We're not asking for a gift, just a loan until we can figure this out. I felt a cold anger settling over me. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Charlotte, the brilliant, exceptional, Harvard and Yale-educated lawyer that you've spent my entire life telling me I could never measure up to, got arrested for embezzlement. And now you want me, the ordinary, disappointing son whose accomplishments were never quite good enough, to bail her out. Do I have that right? My father's voice came on the line. Apparently I was on speaker. Don't be petty, Nathan. This isn't the time for your wounded pride. Charlotte made a mistake, that's all. The firm is being vindictive because she was planning to leave. It's all blown out of proportion. If it's all a mistake and blown out of proportion, I said calmly, then surely her fancy lawyer friends and all those prestigious contacts you've been bragging about for years can help her. Surely the daughter you threw lavish parties for and supported through the best schools has resources and connections I don't have. Surely she doesn't need her disappointing younger brother who you couldn't even be proud of at his own graduation. There was a long silence. Then my mother spoke again, her voice cold now. Fine, be selfish. But you should know that this will have consequences, Nathan. Your grandparents are extremely disappointed in your attitude. They've always hoped you would grow into a better man than this, and you're proving them right to have doubts about your character. She hung up, and I stood there holding the phone, my hand shaking. Not because I was reconsidering my decision, but because I was so angry I could barely see straight. They had the audacity to try to manipulate me with my grandparents, to paint me as the villain when Charlotte was the one who had apparently committed an actual crime. I called Emily at work and told her what happened. They have some nerve, she said, her voice tight with anger on my behalf. You made the right call. Don't second-guess yourself, but the situation was far from over. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Grandpa George, his voice stern and disappointed. Nathan, I need you to come to the house this weekend. Your grandmother and I need to speak with you about a serious matter. I almost refused, but something in his tone suggested this wasn't optional. I agreed to come, and that Saturday, I drove to my grandparents' large house in the suburbs, the house where I'd spent countless childhood holidays feeling like an afterthought. My grandparents were waiting in the formal living room, and the moment I walked in, I knew this was going to be bad. They looked at me with expressions I'd seen 1,000 times growing up, the expression that said I was a disappointment before I even opened my mouth. Sit down, Nathan, Grandpa George said. I sat, and he began speaking in the tone he usually reserved for lecturing about responsibility and family values. Your grandmother and I have been discussing your refusal to help your sister in her time of need. We're both extremely concerned about the kind of man you're becoming. When your parents called us and explained the situation, we were shocked by your selfishness. I interrupted him. Did they tell you what they said to me at my graduation? Grandma Ruth waved her hand dismissively. That was for years ago, Nathan. Whatever hurt feelings you have, this is more important. Your sister could go to prison. She could lose everything she's worked for. And you, who have been given every advantage in life, refuse to help her because of some petty grudge. I felt something inside me break, but not in the way it had broken at graduation. This was different. This was the final, definitive severing of hope that these people would ever see me as anything other than the lesser child. Every advantage, I said quietly. I worked my way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. I paid for my own car, my own apartment, my own everything while Charlotte had her tuition, living expenses, and law school paid for in full. I gave a speech at my graduation that I was proud of, and my parents publicly humiliated me in front of everyone I cared about. And you both stood there and participated. You told me I was ordinary, that Charlotte set too high a bar, that your expectations for me were realistic because I didn't have her abilities. And now you're calling me selfish. Grandpa George's face hardened. Your parents were trying to give you a reality check, Nathan. Not everyone can be special. Charlotte has gifts that you simply don't have, and there's no shame in accepting that. But refusing to help family when they need it, that's shameful. That's unforgivable. He paused, letting his words sink in. Your grandmother and I have been reviewing our estate planning. We had intended to leave our estate split evenly between you and Charlotte, but given your attitude and your refusal to support your family in crisis, we're reconsidering that decision. We wanted you to know that if you don't reconsider and help your sister, we will be revising our will to reflect your selfishness. Charlotte will inherit everything, and you will get nothing. Maybe that will teach you about the consequences of putting pride above family. I stood up slowly, looking at these two elderly people who I had thought, despite everything, at least cared about me on some basic level. I'd been wrong. They saw me exactly the way my parents did, as less than, as the disappointment. As the child who existed only to serve the golden child when convenient. Let me tell you what actually happened, I said, my voice steady and cold. Charlotte, your brilliant, perfect granddaughter, didn't make a mistake or get caught up in some misunderstanding. She embezzled money from her firm. Real money? Enough that the bail is set at $500,000, which means the charges are serious and the evidence is probably substantial. And instead of facing the consequences of her own actions like an adult, she's hiding behind our parents, who are now trying to manipulate me into fixing her mess by using you as leverage. Grandma Ruth opened her mouth to speak, but I kept going. I have spent my entire life being told I'm not good enough, not smart enough, not accomplished enough, not special enough. I have been the afterthought at every family gathering, the footnote in every conversation. The child whose achievements were never quite worth celebrating because they paled in comparison to Charlotte's. And I accepted it because I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just ordinary. Maybe I should be grateful they tolerate me at all. But you know what I learned over the past 4 years? I learned that I'm not ordinary. I'm talented and hardworking and successful in my own right. I learned that the problem wasn't me, it was all of you. You created a hierarchy in this family where one child was worshipped and the other was barely acknowledged. And you're so invested in that hierarchy that even when the golden child commits crimes, you still expect the scapegoat to save her. I took a breath, feeling lighter with every word. So here's what's going to happen. I'm not giving Charlotte a single penny. I'm not helping her. I'm not visiting her. I'm not advocating for her. She's an adult who made adult choices, and she can face adult consequences. And as for your will, do whatever you want with your money. Leave it all to Charlotte, burn it, donate it to charity. I genuinely don't care, because I don't need your money, and I don't need your approval. I needed it when I was a kid, and you withheld it. But I'm not a kid anymore. Grandpa George stood up, his face red with anger. Get out of this house. You're an ungrateful, selfish young man, and you're not welcome here anymore. I nodded. That works for me. But before I go, I want you both to know something. In 10 years, when you're looking back on this moment, I want you to remember that you chose money and image over relationship. You chose to protect a criminal over supporting the grandchild who actually built something honest with his life. And when you're old and sick and Charlotte is too busy or too important to visit you, don't call me. Because I'm done. I'm done being the disappointment. I'm done being the backup plan. I'm done being part of a family that never actually wanted me. I walked out, got in my car, and drove away. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. Completely, utterly free. The next few months were surreal. Charlotte's case went to trial, and it turned out the charges were not a misunderstanding at all. She'd been systematically embezzling from her firm's client trust accounts for over 2 years, using the money to fund a lifestyle she couldn't actually afford: designer clothes, luxury vacations, a penthouse apartment way beyond her salary. The evidence was overwhelming, and she eventually took a plea deal that resulted in 5 years in federal prison and full restitution of the stolen funds, which totaled nearly $800,000. My parents were devastated, not because their daughter was a criminal, but because of how it reflected on them. I heard through mutual acquaintances that my mother had a breakdown over the shame of having a daughter in prison, and my father threw himself into his work to avoid dealing with the reality of the situation. Neither of them reached out to me again. My grandparents followed through on their threat and revised their will, leaving everything to Charlotte. I found out through a certified letter informing me that I had been removed as a beneficiary. I filed the letter away without a second thought. Emily and I got engaged 6 months after the trial ended, and we started planning a wedding that would include only people who actually loved and supported us. Here's what I learned through all of this: blood doesn't make you family, and family doesn't obligate you to destroy yourself to save people who never valued you in the first place. I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from people who diminish you, even if they're related to you, even if society tells you that family is everything. I learned that I am not, and never was, the disappointment. I was just the person who refused to accept being treated as less than, and that made me inconvenient for people who needed a scapegoat to make themselves feel superior. Charlotte is in prison now, serving her sentence. My parents visit her regularly, still making excuses for her, still convinced that somehow the system failed their perfect daughter. My grandparents, now in their 80s, apparently tell people they have one granddaughter because acknowledging my existence means acknowledging their own cruelty and favoritism. And me, I'm thriving. I got promoted to senior engineer. Emily and I got married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by our chosen family. We bought a house. We're talking about kids. And I haven't spoken to my biological family in over 4 years, and I don't miss them even a little bit. Sometimes people ask me if I have regrets, if I wish I'd tried to maintain some kind of relationship with my family despite everything. And my answer is always the same. I regret that I wasted 22 years believing their assessment of me. I regret that I didn't set boundaries sooner. I regret the years I spent trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. But I don't regret walking away. I don't regret refusing to bail out Charlotte. I don't regret standing up to my grandparents. Those were the moments when I finally chose myself, when I finally decided that my worth wasn't determined by their approval. And that decision saved my life in ways I'm still discovering. To anyone reading this who sees themselves in my story, who has been the scapegoat or the forgotten child or the disappointment in their family, you are not the problem. You never were. And you deserve people in your life who see your value, celebrate your accomplishments, and love you for exactly who you are. If your biological family can't or won't do that, build a new family. Choose people who choose you back. And don't ever let anyone convince you that you're obligated to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. You're not. You're worth so much more than that. And someday, when you're living your best life surrounded by people who genuinely love you, you'll look back on the moment you walked away and realize it wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning.